You know, we've heard the outline of what's going on in these communities in Lake County, and now we're going to hear a little bit more about the trends. And our moderator is Warren Ribley, and I'm going to let Warren Ribley tell you first of all a little bit about his group before he introduces the panelists. And Warren, there you go. Step up.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I want to thank Real Estate Journal and Lake County Partners for putting this summit together. It's good for me to be able to interact with everyone and kind of get a better sense of what's happening and make everyone kind of goes away with an uplifted feeling about the opportunities. So it's great to hear the mayor perspectives, and now with this panel we're going to kind of turn to the private sector perspective on development opportunities and trends and sector strengths in Lake County. Here representing the Upper Illinois River Valley Development Authority. It is a 9-county special district unit of government that primarily focuses on tax-exempt bond financing. We work very closely with Lake County partners. In fact, Kevin is the Lake County representative on the board of directors. It's a local board. Each county has its own representative, and so many members also appointed by the governor. Another good opportunity that we found for Lake County is the fact that we also have our own enterprise zone, which means we can capture a project site where there's a development project occurring, put that into our enterprise zone. It's not a 90, 120-day process, but the benefit is that if you're doing renovation or new construction, you get a complete sales tax exemption on all the building materials. So in Lake County, that can range from around 8%. The state sales tax rate is 6.25%, and there's typically a municipal or county sales tax. So that can be a pretty significant savings. And Lake County only has a couple of enterprise zones. There's one that actually helped create up in Zion, and there's one in Waukegan in North Chicago, but the rest of the county does not have an enterprise zone, so we can fill in on that gap. And you'll see some of the projects that we have financed in Lake County on the slides, both enterprise zone and bond projects. Lake County was added, let's see, I think in about 2016, 2017. Since then, we've done 7 enterprise zone projects and 5 bond financing projects, so that's pretty good. But as I said, I mean, we're going to shift the focus a little bit on to the private sector, and we've got a really good panel. I'll just give a little kind of brief background on each of them, and then we'll get into the questions. First, over at my far left, we have Ron Plonis with Kaiser Group, and Ron is primarily focuses on multifamily development and investment at the Kaiser Group. His clients benefit from 17 years of real estate development experience. On my right is Gordon Lanfear. Gordon's Director of Sales and Leasing at Van Plissingen and Company. Focuses primarily on commercial real estate. Right? And Matt Nafel with MK Asset Management, Senior Associate in Real Estate Brokerage. I'll let them expand on your own backgrounds as we get going. But, you know, we already talked a lot about what's happened over the last 20 months with COVID. and it certainly has turned things around. I think it's also shown the resiliency that we have. But I'd like to ask each of the panelists really to kind of talk about their own experiences and how they've had to adjust. Gordon, you want to take it up?
Yeah, sure thing. So starting out, I know I'll touch on a little bit of what the last panel talked about, but what we've seen in the market is there's been an upheaval, but a lot of it was coming due. We had a large flood of office, particularly office that was designed for a corporate model that was based around the 1980s and 1990s. And what overwhelmingly we've seen the media generally talk about, be it Forbes or the New York Times, will talk about things like the death of office. We don't see that in the market. What we see is overwhelmingly that there's definitely a struggle going on right now. There's definitely, you're sitting in an office space right now that's vacant, right? But at the same time, we've seen in our small to mid-sized office portfolio, kind of those offices that are anywhere between 800 and 3,000 square feet, they are well leased. And what we're seeing is the market is definitely shifted. There's smaller, more agile, more flexible office. And it's less of the traditional big box bullpen with 50,000 foot square floor plans and the big open office cube. That's not the model anymore. I think as a county and as developers, we have to adjust to that model. But there's definitely a bright future ahead, particularly with reevaluating footprints and looking towards more flexible and honestly more diverse office models. When you build a building or a community around 2,000 to 5,000 foot offices and small family or regional businesses, it's a much more robust economic environment long term. And I think that's the county's model going forward.
And maybe you want to take a shot at that and talk a little bit about the industrial sector.
I think as a broker, we were forced to work hard for the first time in a while, not so much on business development, but on speaking with people about what their anticipations were for change, how their businesses were going to be affected. Everyone talks about Amazon, and rightfully so. They were responsible for over 20% of leasing in a record year in Chicago in 2020. And they're on pace for similar numbers again here in 21. So it really propped up the market, but they're not the only ones who focus on industrial space or office space, which is where we're focused. So we had to go out in these communities and talk to people at a time where it wasn't easy to get in front of people and figure out how is your business going to be affected geographically from a labor standpoint and what are the outcomes going to be. And a lot of people didn't know. So we had to be patient and wait. And a lot of those answers are starting to come to light now as they've had some time to adapt, pause, furlough, lay people off. Now people are coming back. Businesses are thriving again. And we're starting to now see the shape of the market and what the long-term, or at least near-term and long-term impacts will be on how they're going to occupy space.
So the question was about COVID, is that correct?
Yeah, and just how you've had to adjust in your own business models over the last 20 months.
Well, after about a 3-month pause, it's been one of the busiest times in multifamily. And you hear over and over again, setting medical aside, that is always going to be an asset class that thrives, but office and retail are vulnerable to societal changes like this. Industrial and multifamily will typically thrive through change and stay stable in that, no matter what happens in the world, you have to live somewhere. And people like stuff, and these logistics centers have to supply it. Obviously, that was all, as you said, coming due. COVID was really the great accelerant of what was going to be good, got good fast, and what was going away, went away fast. So specific to multifamily, because that's really what I focus on, there are certain trends from city to the suburbs that were accelerated, which have subsided now, but that it just did 2 years of migration in the first year. But the big change for multifamily has been programming and unit size and location. Outside of denser areas, there's, such as the city to the suburbs, has been a big trend. I think it's hard to codify specific to the city of Chicago which of that was space or safety related concerns. I think there's a certain component to each that I can't quantify. But on the suburban side, we saw early in the pandemic larger unit sizes, dens, places to work, and amenities became less important at that time. They're becoming important again, but it's really about unit size and location.
Thank you. Well, we just kind of build off of that a little bit, and hopefully we are approaching the kind of post-recovery from the pandemic. And as we continue into that phase, do you see new opportunities, and what kind of development opportunities are there in kind of the sectors you're working with? And if there are certain sectors that you see that are stronger than the others, what are you seeing in opportunities these days? Ron, I might just start with you again, because as we listened to the mayor's panel, it seemed like there was a lot of interest in multifamily development in a number of these communities.
Yes, the private-public partnership. So there's always a good presentation and description of the desire for multifamily and workforce housing from a municipal and village leadership perspective. Where it becomes troublesome, there's typically two factors. There's still a stigma in the community from a public hearing perspective and a populist perspective that apartments are a negative class of resident. It's just not true anymore. The wallet share on some of these luxury apartment buildings that are mostly being developed outside of workforce housing are equivalent to being able to buy a home in the same community, maybe less. They're making these choices much like we make choices to have DoorDash bring food or use Uber instead of owning a car. It's a certain segment of the population is viewing housing as a service now. So there's not this, I'm renting because I can't afford the American dream, but the negative connotation on the public hearing is still out there. The mayor, the plan commissions, the trustees all feel that pressure, and it makes it difficult to approve some of these developments, by and large. And then Mayor Shapiro talked about the mixed use piece. I think there's still a disconnect between the economic realities of mixed use development, meaning residential on top and some kind of commercial component on the bottom. I think the gap needs to be closed. I agree that there are a lot of benefits to mixed use, but the lower, by and large, the municipalities want more than really economically makes sense from a development perspective. Setting aside TIF districts and things of that nature and subsidies. Okay. Sorry if I got too technical there.
Well, industrial's always been the ugly stepchild of commercial underneath the umbrella, especially from a municipal standpoint. Retail and office are typically the darlings, and industrial works its way to the bottom just because it's not a sexy asset class. But that's changing. The way the buildings are being designed, the aesthetic, more glass. Precast is a much nicer looking material than the original precast or metal structures. So the buildings that are being designed and built now are much more functional, much more aesthetically pleasing. But that being said, the challenge for Lake County, I think for industrial development specifically, is labor is always going to be the driver. And it's not to say Lake County doesn't have strong labor, but there's a transportation challenge in that Lake County is really a chute along I-94. If you go 3 to 4 miles east, you get water. If you go 3 to 4 miles west, it becomes fairly rural and harder to compete for labor. So finding sites that are within 2 miles off of interchanges on 94, similar to what Panettone's doing on Darling Farms in Vernon Hills, what IOV is doing at the southeast corner of Deerfield and Milwaukee in Riverwoods, where they're getting a TIF to repurpose an old landfill. There's an old landfill in Buffalo Grove where we had a developer looking, that Topgolf was looking at, that ended up going to Schaumburg, that was going to be into industrial. Buffalo Grove was supportive of TIF, but the compaction and removing fill from the landfill just hadn't caught up yet. So I do think the long-term impacts of that site are industrial in some form or fashion, but there's becoming more of a partnership between development and municipal because there's going to be economic reliance from these municipalities to support not greenfield sites, but dirtier sites that are either environmentally challenged or have some sort of development risk in terms of the site work that needs to be done, because that's what you have to do to get closer in to the population. So that's the biggest challenge specifically to Lake County and other places, but in terms of finding quality development sites that might have once been slated for commercial, office, or retail type of development.
So I'll follow up with that. It's definitely true that the hardest part, we're often seen as office developers, and that's true. But only about 40% of our portfolio is actually office. About 60% is industrial. And I would say, from our perspective, the industrial market is definitely true. The hardest thing to do is to find great industrial sites. There's a really limited corridor between available space in Lake County along I-94 and then any of the other major fairways. And so when you're looking at ultimately trying to find sites, what we found and what we've tried to adapt to is redevelopment. So our group has gone in and we've purchased 5 new properties in the last 8 months, all within Lake County, all close to or nearby 94, in a number of the communities, including many of the communities that our panelists talked about beforehand. Libertyville, Gurnee, looked at new properties in Vernon Hills, and what we found is, I think right now, one of the hardest things to find in Lake County besides land sites is land sites that make sense economically. Because what we're looking at is the market is harder to develop than ever before. During COVID, we've seen supply chain shocks, labor shortages, and if you're going to sit there and try to rebuild an existing land site, you could save $10, $20, $30 a square foot, which ultimately is going to go on the back end of the deal. So what I would say is what we've seen in the pandemic, while there's been an industrial boom, one of the greatest ways that we've been able to find an advantage in the market is looking at all the opportunities to redevelop the county.
Just to follow up on that a little bit, so it sounds like your current business model is purchasing some existing facilities, and then are you holding those and sort of a speculative basis, or do you have specific clients coming to you looking for those type of facilities, and then maybe to Matt, are you seeing any appetite for speculative building investment, or again, is it more build to suit based on a particular need of the customer?
So I'll touch on what the mayor said at the start. We had a property that we owned. It was a bank that was no longer in use. We sold and redeveloped that property. But overwhelmingly, besides that property, we looked at long-term hold. We think Lake County is a strong market. We believe in Lake County. And so we're redeploying assets. And look, there are a lot of developers that make a lot of money flipping assets, but that's just never been our model. And so our model is on the redevelopment and long hold, and we believe in Lake County.
Yeah, industrial has become the hot asset class, both from a development standpoint as well as in the capital markets. A lot of large REITs have repurposed funds to focus on investing in buying either vacant or fully leased industrial buildings that were built on spec. And cap rates, sort of our year one rate of returns for an Amazon leased facility in Chicago right now could be sub 3, which is just crazy. I mean, that's That's California numbers in the hottest times of the market. And now California's pushing sub 2, and I mean, it's all across the board. We see it. We do deals all over the country. We see it in Indianapolis. We see it in Minneapolis. There's so much competition in the private sector that's trying to invest in industrial because they have money to spend. It might have been slated elsewhere or was purposely raised for industrial, and they're competing, and they have to get money out the door. You know, unless you're a family office or somebody that can control your investment, if you work for an institutional group, you're compensated based on getting money out the door. So that's putting a lot of pressure on the market. That's going to have an effect at some point. We don't know when that is, but so the appetite for building spec right now is as hot as it's ever been because rents are up 40%, and that's because there's scarcity of quality product. It's the first time in my career, which is a little over 7 years, that we've seen. So I've been through a full cycle that we've seen true rent growth. You ask anyone in the brokerage business, they'll tell you this is the craziest time that they've seen. It doesn't mean that it's not going to get crazier, that something's going to change in the future, but everyone wants to get something out of the ground right now because they know they can push rents and they know they can exit the building if they don't lease it, and if they do, it's a home run.
Okay, thank you.
Can I touch on that? Just really quickly. So I think one of the biggest challenges going forward, not from the private sector level, because look, industrial is good on the private sector level, is the public sector level. That what we've created in Lake County is overwhelmingly, there's kind of two different stocks of industrial space. There's kind of your 1990 stock, which is predominantly 18 to 24 foot clear, more on the 18 side. That's a difficult market for a lot of tenants to come into. Rents are going up, and look, it's really profitable for us because, you know, everybody likes to see scarcity and demand when you have some of the largest supply. But I think as a community, what we have to look at importantly is understanding that there's going to be limited supply, particularly of industrial space that's designed for that startup or that new business in the market. And Lake County needs to look at overwhelmingly finding avenues for small and mid-sized industrial businesses to be able to compete in the market, or we're not going to have the robust industrial growth that we long-term want to see. And so one of the reasons why we've been so successful in redeploying capital is on the large end, all the REITs, all the large industrial businesses have come in and put up big box industrial, which is great. It's tremendously profitable. That's what the economy wants long-term. But there's been very little new supply of small to mid-sized industrial. And if we have a very top-heavy industrial market long-term, that's where we see that you can have a bubble within Lake County, not necessarily a financial collapse at the start or at the top, but what you could see is a bubble where there won't be available space for new businesses to come in and create that robust economy that Lake County needs.
If I could add on to that, it's a similar thing is happening with development of multifamily right now in Illinois, and well, irrespective of Lake County, but even in Lake County specifically, there's two segments of housing. There's workforce housing, there's luxury apartment development. Luxury apartment development is the only thing being approved and built without considerable subsidy. And if you just go right across the border in Wisconsin, they're able to develop workforce housing, semi-luxury new development because of the tax structure, property tax structure. Down here, while a lot of the townships in Lake County are favorable when you compare to Cook County, it's still a big number to make anything work in the workforce housing. So you have the same situation. There's a high demand for this housing. You need labor, you need vibrant communities. Not everybody is of affluence. There's just not a lot of new development that can happen. So it's similar to the situation you have there. We're doing redevelopment on the workforce side and converting condominiums that were converted into condos when they shouldn't have been back is where all the activity to supply that housing in Lake County's happening right now.
From the UIRVDA perspective, the type of housing that we typically are financing is affordable housing, some workforce, but in order to qualify for the federal tax exemptions, there has to be a certain set aside of a number of units for a certain percentage of average median income. But where we have seen a lot of growth is on the senior living, assisted living side, because it's easier to hit those ratios, and we've seen quite a bit of demand in Lake County for that as well. But Ron, that was a good kind of a segue, I think, into where we want to go next, and it's really kind of a focus on Lake County and what the strengths and competitive advantages of Lake County are, and sort of our pre-discussions. I got sort of an education on that myself. Former position, I was director of the State Economic Development Agency, so we were always concerned about the competitive pressures with Wisconsin, and of course we still are, Prairie Crossing in that area. But then, to the south, you've got Cook County, and Cook County has issues, it's got its advantages, it has its disadvantages. So, I think Lake County is sort of in a multiple competitive position, both with being on a border county, and then, with the huge county of Cook and city of Chicago. So why don't each of you try to kind of address maybe what you see as Lake County's strengths, and then how do you compete, and how is Lake County doing with respect to those competitive pressures from both Wisconsin and Cook County? Want to take that first?
Well, I think we have a lot of advantages. One of the nice advantages we have is lower taxes than Cook. And one of the big advantages we have than our neighbors to the north is that we have a labor supply that's ready to meet 21st century demand. We have an educated workforce, we have a skilled workforce, and honestly, I feel very blessed to do the vast majority of my business in Lake County. I get a lot of calls on a pretty regular basis from folks trying to exit Cook County because of taxes, or because they don't like the political circumstances of working in a market that's not always seemingly fair to small to mid-sized businesses, particularly around tax issues. And certainly from the pharma end, which is pharma and medical is a great asset in Lake County, we see a lot of growth and development because of the labor force, and a lot of people in the buildings around here and the parks around here are driven by that labor force. So I think we have an incredible advantage, and sometimes I think we short sell ourselves.
Can't ignore Cook County. I mean, it is the worst taxing body probably in the country, if not, it's definitely top 3. 6B, they do have the 6B program. The 6B taxes when I started were high $1 to low $2 per square foot. That's how we quantify everything in brokerage. Now they're above $3, regardless of where you are in Cook County. If you're south suburbs, they're usually closer to $4. And large corporate users are going to be able to absorb that cost if they have to be in the area. But where it's being affected is if you drive around Elk Grove Village and you drive by 2, 3, 4, 5,000 square foot machine shops. They have 2 to 3 employees. It's a family-owned business. The owner of the business has probably continued to work through retirement. He or she paid $5,000 in taxes at one point. Now they pay $40,000, and they need somewhere to go because that is an enormous hit. If you're a business with $500,000, $750,000 in top-line revenue, and your taxes go from $10,000 to $40,000, and we know what Fritz Kage's trying to do. He's trying to right the ship of tax attorneys coming in and making boatloads of money. But they're always going to be there. And people are complaining now more than ever about the increase in taxes, even though he's trying to stabilize the problem so that they don't keep going up. But it's just created more money for these tax attorneys. And so I think where Lake County has an opportunity, especially with Wheeling and Northbrook being immediately to the south, to Vernon Hills and Buffalo Grove. But as you get farther north, Waukegan, Gurnee, you start to compete with that border a little more. But when you're in the Vernon Hills, Buffalo Grove area, there's a real opportunity to pick from Cook County and people who operate there that are not making that far of a drive. And you still have access to tons of rooftops. And that's what Cook County's always going to have going for it. We're working with a foreign candy manufacturer who's out of Latin America. They're going to open a flagship facility here in Illinois. We said, why are you looking in Illinois? Like, you're supplied, you come from Iowa. You could go to Northwest Indiana easily. There's quality labor there. Like, no, we need to be your Spanish-speaking labor, and we're going to have people traveling in from where they're from. We could fly into O'Hare, fly into Midway, and they don't want to be too far from the airport. And those people who come in, they want them to have the feel of, you'll be able to go to a neighborhood or a feel of where their hometown is. And when you get more rural, that becomes part of a problem. So it's not a common thing to hear that someone who's going to open a facility, they're going to open it in Illinois, but we're seeing it with Line Electric and Joliet. People need to be here because of density, and the opportunity for Lake County is competing on that tax standpoint, but also allowing there to be developments in areas that are more dense as opposed to having to push too far out.
Yeah, not to continue to bang the property tax drum, but that's other than density, which is Cook County's only saving grace, the number of people and the talent that lives there. Their taxing system is so opaque that you lose predictability, and when you lose predictability, you lose investment, because these same people that Matt referenced that are getting paid to get money out of the door will get fired to place money out of the door, and the taxes go up 40%. So while Fritz does have a clear and bold mission, at the end of his statement where, these are just assessments and the levy is going to be the levy, and we're just trying to bring things in line to eliminate an appeal industry, isn't translating. We've been through 3 triads. All of the assessments went up 40%, and all the taxes did go up 40%, but they went up more than they did in the past before the new system. So enough bagging on Cook County. And Lake County, while the amounts, township by township, aren't markedly different than many of the Cook County townships, they're predictable. You could go into Moraine Township and say, here's my asset, here's what I'm building, and you can get a commitment and predictability and therefore investment. So that's one thing that Lake County has. So if development investment could leverage that and still pull from the workforce in nearby counties, both to the north in Wisconsin and Cook, I think it's a winning formula.
Yeah, can I just really quickly as well, I know I keep interrupting, but I think the other thing beyond predictability that we see in the taxing situation is overwhelmingly the application of code here is relatively predictable as well. Our fire districts, if you're looking at any of the general permitting process, it's very predictable, particularly in South and Central Lake County. And so I think that's a huge asset, and it's a testament to how the villages tend to operate, is that you guys do a great job of allowing development to understand generally what their requirements are so that we can end up meeting our clients' demands. And so that's a testament to Lake County as well. And honestly, the brokerage and development community understands that. And so when they're placing folks in Lake County, that's truly important.
Thank you. Wanted to talk about an issue that I think is somewhat relevant here locally, and to see what kind of opportunities each of you might see, and that has to do with repurposing of suburban malls. We have a couple of examples. One example right down the road with Hawthorne and then the Gurnee Mills, and been a lot of talk about how online retail has changed that structure, but these are still pretty significant assets, and there are people I think that are looking outside the box to kind of repurpose those. Do you see any opportunity in your lines of work for assisting in that effort? Ron?
Yeah, regarding, there's a few specific to Lake County, but the model is being applied in other areas. Hawthorne, referred to as Hawthorne 2.0, is luxury multifamily development with destination retail on the first floor. So I always characterize it as Oakbrook Center with apartments on top. Is what they're replacing that old model with, the old mall model, and their focus. And Atlantic Realty Partners, they're doing the same thing down in DuPage County at Fox Valley. I think it's a great reuse of the space. It was born out of a partnership with, I can't remember the name of the company that owns all the Sears real estate, but that's what's been the impetus behind that. Melody Farms, at Melody Farms is another one in Vernon Hills that wasn't necessarily a mall, but it's proximate to a mall and it was reused, and it's luxury apartments. But you can see the same theme with all of workforce housing development is not happening. It's unfortunate for the people, not necessarily the developers. The developers will find something that pencils out the luxury market and they'll make money, they'll bake in the taxes, and then everything will be fine, but the rent's passed on to the luxury marketplace where they can pay that, and the workforce housing is just aging and not being developed. So sorry, I brought it around to that because I feel like there's got to be a way to reuse some of this space and build workforce housing, but it's likely going to require cooperation with an organization like yours or a public-private partnership or TIF. There's just not a lot of it. All the TIF development that I'm involved with is all luxury.
Any role on the office side? Probably not so much on the accessories.
So I think it's just a testament to how times change, right? I mean, so I wasn't working at the business then, but there's plenty of documentation, and you ask any of the old timers at Van Blissingen, they tried to develop multi-use property all over Lake County in the 90s. So multiple communities, and were said, oh, no one wants an apartment by the mall, or nobody wants to have offices and apartments combined with retail. That's crazy. Nobody will ever want that. And turned us down in the 90s. And then we had multiple folks in economic development come to us when I was working in the business in the teens, and said, why haven't you ever done this? Like this is such a great opportunity. And I think it just goes to the idea of we're always evolving. We're evolving as communities, we're evolving as businesses, and we've done redevelopments. We haven't done redevelopments of retail space for housing, but we've certainly redeveloped retail space for light and flex industrial, and we've redeveloped space for small businesses like the bank on the corner in Vernon Hills. And so we love the opportunity to see projects if they work out. It just depends on if they're economically feasible. And I think a theme today, and a theme that all of us will keep harping on, is that we are constantly evolving as communities and as businesses. And so there's definitely opportunity to redevelop malls. I haven't seen the economic feasibility from our perspective in office or industrial, but I'm sure we'll reach a point where, like you see in Chicago, there are certain malls that have been redeveloped as distribution centers, and that may come to pass in Lake County as well.
From the industrial standpoint, it's got to be freestanding. If it's going to be converted to industrial, you're not going to have one that's a part of a larger strip center. That part of it's going to be industrial. And there's a lot of things to like. Parking, you have depth to add docks. There's good clear height in big box retail centers that would be similar to what you would build in industrial, and they're generally in better locations than what you can get for industrial. So depending upon where you are, I think it's a really good opportunity. We haven't seen a ton of it. What we have seen is Discover took an old Target on the south side of Chicago, an old Target in Calumet City was repurposed into a vertical farm. We're seeing a lot of cannabis production centers in more rural areas being converted in these old retail centers. So it's I don't think it's really ever going to make a big splash as a hybrid distribution center. We have a group right now who's got offers on 2 large former single strip centers in California and one in Brooklyn, New York. One in California is going to be redeveloped into a life science development, and the one in Brooklyn, they're figuring it out. It might be office, it might be a multifamily development, but in some shape or form, they're going to repurpose the existing asset. They might go vertical on top of it. They might scrape the whole thing and do something different. So we're seeing it. It's not made a big splash, but there definitely are things to like about it from an industrial standpoint if it can be achieved.
Just to add to that just a little bit, I'd just like to highlight sort of a local effort. There is a company, you may have seen it on the site, well, there it is right there, Life 14. Life 14 Enterprises, it's Life 14 Co-working, and they're actually repurposing some of the mall space in both those 2, Hawthorne and Gurney Mills, into kind of a combination of communal workspace. So it's kind of a step up from working at home, but yet you know, still not able to go downtown or whatever, but you still have more of a conducive office space. But also entrepreneurship centers there, and business mentoring, business incubator, as well as some workforce development. That's a couple of local entrepreneurs that are taking that on as part of a bigger vision, and we were able to offer them some enterprise zone benefits to assist with that. There's been some talk about public-private partnerships, and we had a panel with the mayors here, and then certainly with Lake County partners, which, you know, I work with a lot of economic development groups across the state, and just kudos to Lake County partners. They probably have it together better than hardly anyone else I've ever worked with. So Kevin and Ron, just point that out. But in your development opportunities, how important is it to have that cooperation and that role with the local economic development officials and the municipals? I mean, you kind of touched on the permitting, but tell us about that partnership and how that helps make your business easier.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious to anybody who works in development and business and brokerage how important it is to have a strong relationship with not only the community, but local economic development and local community groups. There's a reason that you know, there's a reason that Kevin offices in our building, and we love Lake County and love working with Kevin and the local economic development group that we have here at Lake County Partners. Beyond that, we love working with Lincolnshire, Buffalo Grove, and Vernon Hills, and Libertyville, and all these groups, all these areas where we have properties, because overwhelmingly the most important thing for us is to have a strong relationship with the community in which we operate. That's, you know, as I touched on earlier, that's one of our biggest advantages that we have on Cook County, is that overwhelmingly the communities, you know, we were doing a deal recently out in Lake Zurich, and the community was sophisticated and developed, and you don't see that all the time when you're doing business, even in a dense area like Cook County, because of all its issues. And that's one of the biggest advantages, I think, that we often have over Cook, and sometimes even Wisconsin as well. And so when we're looking forward, I think the most important thing is to have that sustained partnership where we're in this together. You know, look, there are some developers that sit there and they try to close the door for other developments in the area. We've never been that kind of a developer. We think that the tide rises all ships, and our goal has always been to make Lake County as strong as possible, because if it's a strong business environment, that means you're more likely to see sustained development and success within your own portfolio. we've just been very impressed overwhelmingly at how not only Lake County partners, but how our general communities operate and their flexibility and their understanding. And we just hope going forward that we can have that same flexible, understanding relationship to try to create a stronger Lake County.
Yeah, you can't have one without the other, and you can't get developments completed without cooperating with municipal leaders and groups. And what I would say to municipal groups is, from what I do on a day-to-day basis, which is industrial, be amenable that is, at least in the next 10 to 15 years, the wave of development that's going to be the most popular, and you're probably going to get the most calls on for interest on sites that might be in your comprehensive plan for another use. But would you consider this on this site because it's large enough, et cetera? And then to the developer side and the broker side, we can get carried away without being checked by local officials and leaders. The project would get out of control probably to try to build something that isn't reflective of what you want in the community. So my challenge to developers and brokers would be pay attention to what's needed in the market. Gordon harped on it earlier. Just because you can build a 500,000 square foot building doesn't mean you necessarily should. There's probably demand for 480 or 400,000 square foot buildings. It might be less of an FAR, and you're going to have to be challenged on your underwriting a little bit to try to make things work, but ultimately it's going to be a better project locally. And when those ideas are thrown out, don't just disregard them and say, you're crazy, I'm trying to create jobs in their community, this is great. Be receptive, because they're in the community every single day, whereas we might just parachute in for a project because it makes sense for us and that's how we make money.
What you said. Yeah, I think as much as there is on the developer side and brokerage side about the municipalities, I think all of the successful interactions have to be one where the developer walks away feeling like they compromised and the village didn't get what they want. So I cited the mixed use example, and I'm sorry, focusing only on multifamily. The mixed use example, we always start out like in general, we're going to put in 80 units of apartments and they want 8,000 square feet of retail. We usually end up compromising with like 3,000 to 4,000 square feet of retail and the rest of the space looking like retail, so everyone's meeting their goals. We have usable rentable space for residential development. We do have some mixed-use applications, and it might vary from what they wanted. We might go from a coffee or a restaurant to dental, those types of things. So I think, as you said, we have to work with them to come up with a compromise. But there's some developers that don't negotiate well, and there's some villages that don't negotiate well. So you only hear about the developments that don't happen. The ones that do happen, usually you have two parties that are working very well together.
We don't have a lot of time left, but I do want to get to one more question, and we'll see if there's any questions. But from the perspective of Upper Illinois River Valley Development Authority, again, one of 10 regional development authorities across the state, I mentioned our special district units of government, but that's there's really very little commonality with other types of units of government. We don't receive any support from the state legislature. We don't have any property tax levies. We function simply on fees that we charge through our projects, but obviously the benefits that developers see are much more significant than the fee income. So we don't have full-time staff. I'm not a full-time employee. I'm actually a contractual employee of the authority. And one of the things we take a great deal of pride in is being nimble and flexible. We have to be in order to get projects done and survive. And I think if you talk to any of the people on the slideshow, you would probably hear that from them firsthand. Final thing I really wanted to touch on, there's a lot of federal money coming in now as a result of COVID and then with the new infrastructure funding. Do you have any insights on what that means for Lake County I mean, I know we talked about the development corridor up to 294, and is there still outstanding infrastructure needs? And how would you, as a developer, like to see some of that funding get used in Lincoln?
So, I've always been a transportation nerd. I went to law school and studied transportation and logistics law and policy at Tulane. That's where I got my JD essentially in transportation. I'm a treasurer of the Lake Cook TMA, and I think one of the most important things is finding an adequate way that's affordable for labor to reach great employment options in Lake County. That's something I truly believe in, and I hope that when we're putting resources and assets into Lake County, we look long term towards how we can best deploy infrastructure, not only to build better roads and bridges, or even better and faster internet, but potentially looking at long-term investments in transportation resources to help not only our office network, which we traditionally help, but also some of our industrial employers find and access jobs or find and access labor. And so that's what I would say I think Lake County really needs going forward, because we have such a narrow corridor between 94 and where a huge portion of economic activity happens, and not everyone in Lake County lives in that corridor. So we need to find a way that we can truly have labor meet up with better economic opportunity.
Trying not to get political. The question was about infrastructure. I think that will have an effect. I think a small percentage of that bill was actually for projects. I agree that getting something in place so people can move around and get from Cook County to here and work would be great. I don't know if it's in there. I think from a government funding perspective, a lot of what we're seeing, I can only speak to multifamily, but in industrial is, since COVID, the Fed has been buying commercial-backed securities, and they're tapering that off. So a lot of these cap rates that you reference that are going forward, 3, 2, 1, is just due to a sheer amount of liquidity in the market, and that is going to subside. So things may return to a less frothy state. But on the infrastructure side, I don't have time to read all that. And it's
Well,
a lot of money.
it is, but I think, again, as we talked about expansion, particularly on the northern part of the 94 corridor, there are communities that still don't have their own independent wastewater treatment systems, and they don't have great access to public water supplies, and that clearly is an impediment to development. So I think that would be a good place for some of this infrastructure to go to open those areas up for your opportunities. We're a couple minutes over, but
No problem.
okay. We have time for any questions from the audience. Any of our developers?
I have a quick one. It's no secret to anyone here that in the city, we've had tremendous civil unrest the last year and a half. And from a commercial real estate perspective, we're talking multifamily, retail, and office. My question is, I'm curious, how much of our loss, people not renewing their leases, people negotiate, we have so many attorneys in the city who spend so much of their time going to court or working on negotiation of getting people out of their office lease or, something of that nature. How much of that loss has been your gain here?
So I will sadly say that we've seen limited, but some office flight from the city. Predominantly what we've seen is satellite offices. So executives who live in Lake Forest to Evanston, or I should say probably Lake Bluff to Evanston, or live in some of the other great neighborhoods like in Libertyville, Vernon Hills, Buffalo Grove, who are tired of commuting downtown, have decided to open up sometimes satellite offices, your classic, 2 to 4 private office with small bullpen. Overwhelmingly, what we've seen is more industrial flight and more lab and flight space flight out of the city. But a lot of that is because there's a huge percentage of office users that are in a holding pattern. And that's mainly due to COVID. I've got probably 5 clients that I have bi-weekly calls with who we look and evaluate the state of the market, and they're ready to come back. But they say, I want to come back to the office when all my employees feel safe. So some of that has locked up the increase in flight that we're seeing out of Chicago. But then at the same time, we've seen a lot of other market activity that's positive, particularly in the areas like lab and industrial that you need to be in it, you need to be in the space, and you can't truly try to wait it out at home if you're a lab or an industrial facility.
So specific to my business, brokerage and then development advisory. On the brokerage side, it hasn't changed anything. Some of my larger private clients that accumulate apartment assets, they just started buying in the suburbs versus the city. So that doesn't change my world. But from a development perspective, we've seen a huge increase in interest in sites from a suburban perspective. So there is a certain amount of flight there. And then irrespective to in the city or outside of the city, there is a need for more, I do a lot more things at home or work from home design of units. That's one piece. And then city specific, there is certain submarkets that are truly redlined, both from a capital markets perspective and from a developer perspective. I'll leave it at that.
We have a partner who is a world-class manufacturer of curling irons, a company called Beach Waiver. They opened a flagship office in Libertyville just behind Innovation Park, a single-story building, great parking. They wanted to be in Libertyville because that's where they're from. They started the business in New York. They wanted this coming home, coming of age story to be released in major media outlets. So they did, and their average employee is 26 and a woman. And COVID hit, but even before COVID hit, they had plans to hire up to 60 to 80 people. They were stuck at 35. They couldn't get people to come out to Libertyville. They were too far from the train, number one. Number two, people didn't want to take the train, who were their audience. And we counseled them on this, and we were looking, we know this is what you want, but you're going to have a really hard time recruiting out here. So they bought out of their lease. It was leased within 3 months by mobile therapy centers, a group who needed parking, needed to be in that area because that's the area they were servicing, and the building catered to exactly what they needed. So it wasn't that there wasn't a demand for the space, but it wasn't right for our client. And I think the city has cracked the code on what COVID office development needs to look like. And it was just a ULI panel where they group said it's new and small, not old and tall. And the new developments that are going on are not outside of the post office, but you get giant floor plates that allow you to be on one floor, so you're not having to get in elevators constantly. And so that's a unique, old and large building. But everything you're seeing now in Fulton Market is less than 200,000 square feet, 6 to 8 stories, and they've got tons of amenities, gym partnerships, restaurants. A lot of these offices now have chefs that can make them lunch in the office, because if you're going to get people to come to the office, you have to offer an amazing experience. And making that possible out here, it's not that it's impossible, but people want to get access to that younger talent, and unless you can crack the code of getting those younger people out here, it's gonna be a challenge. So the candy manufacturer I referenced earlier, they buy in Guatemala where they're from, they buy residential apartments around their facility because people are commuting 2 hours in each way to get to their plant. Like, this is a problem. So they're buying these apartments, giving them to people for free as a part of their compensation package so that they have better, and then they shuttle them to and from work. And they come here and they're like, we want to do the same thing. Never heard of it. I mean, we do multiple industrial deals every year. Never heard of an industrial user say, oh, we'll employ someone to run a shuttle to drop our employees off from home, or we'll buy or build apartments to house our employees that are affordable or maybe even free, that's part of their compensation package. And it's something they will implement here when they come in. So everyone's got a different phase, but I think it's still going to be a challenge to Lake County specifically to compete with those downtown uses, and even more so Sterling Bay is making an enormous push in the biotech and life sciences space, which is a huge driver for the market out here. And I think it's only a matter of time before you see AbbVie start to pull people from the northern suburbs to go down towards younger talent, because there's buildings being built on spec that are modern life science and biotech facilities that are going to be ready to be occupied. And I think it's going to put some serious strain on what's been a lifeblood for the office market up here for decades.
On the repositioning conference that I referred to at the old post office this week, we had a show of hands, and I'm going to ask it here as well. How many of you, in part or in whole, the work week go into the office, and then I want to see how many still work from home exclusively. So how many of you are going in part or whole of your work week to the office? Yeah, this is even a little higher than what we had. We had 3/4, so it's was there anyone still working exclusively from home? Had you done it before the pandemic though, or is just pandemic related? Okay, and so two people, and it just shows you that people are going back in full force. How much that's going to change everything we've talked about or not remains to be seen.
So can I touch on that? So one of the things that's interesting is even before the pandemic in the suburbs, overwhelmingly you've had a lot of flex users, particularly in the most robust section of our portfolio, which is kind of 3,000 feet or less. Overwhelmingly for people that are in the small office market, they fall into one of two categories. One, they're either a small family or small kind of family style office, or the other section, they're a satellite office. And one of the big pitches, even before the pandemic, and this ran, I think, in January or February, the Wall Street Journal was a section on the new idea of a diversified portfolio for large corporations or large law firms, which is the hub and spoke model, the model where you have small office and then strategically located offices around executives or top talent, and where they live in either suburban or near major city metro areas. And so I think that the pandemic, once again, as I started off, is going to really hurt the large footprint office. But for offices that are able to provide top amenities, top school districts in the area, places where people really want to be and want to spend time, those offices have held out. And the biggest thing that we've seen hold out in particular is that small 3,000 to 2,000 foot office floor plan, because those are the offices where you get the amenities, you have a gym in the building, you have food, catering in the building, you have that conference center in the building, and that gives them the ability to really utilize their space, create a unique corporate culture, and really thrive. But the large floor plan office is not going to be the same as it was in the 90s, and we just have to see that as a community, as a reality. And moving forward, I think wherever you are in the country, that's probably going to be the model.
Any other questions from the audience? Okay. Well, I want to thank Ron, Matt, and Gordon for taking time out of your busy day to share these insights. I think it's been incredibly useful, and let's give them a round of applause. One final plug for UIRVDA. On your way out, please pick up some of the materials on the Illinois RDAs and specific to UIRVDA, and you can always visit our website at UIRVDA.com for more information, and love to do some projects with